The river in the city's outskirts flowed cold and relentless. Its waters, muddied by autumn rains, surged forward, sweeping away branches and debris. Wind drove the clouds across the banks, where reeds bent under its pressure. Amid this chaos, in the icy depths, a German shepherd was fighting for her life. Her once golden brown fur was now matted and soaked, and her dark, despair-filled eyes searched desperately for salvation. A coarse, wet rope was tied around her neck at the other end. A sack weighed down with stones pulled her toward the bottom. Every frantic splash, every desperate kick of her paws, drained her strength, but she refused to surrender. Her ragged breaths mingled with the roar of the river. On the shore, near an old bridge, stood Svetlana, a woman with weary eyes and a worn-out coat. She was on her way home from work, her footsteps crunching over gravel, her thoughts occupied with mundane tasks, buying bread, calling her sister. Then she heard it, not a bark, not a cry, but a faint, torn wheeze, like the last gasp of dying hope. Svetlana froze, her heart clenched. She stepped toward the river. Her eyes caught a movement in the water, a silhouette of a dog, its paws thrashing against the waves, its gaze full of struggle locking with hers. "My God," Svetlana whispered, her voice breaking. She dropped her bag without thinking, without weighing the risks, and rushed to the river. The icy water struck her like a blade, but she kept swimming, cutting through the current with determined strokes until her hands reached the sodden fur. The dog, sensing her, made a feeble attempt to move, but the sack dragged her down. Svetlana gasped as her fingers found the rope, and a jolt of horror pierced her. Someone had deliberately tied a weight to drown the animal like trash. "Hold on," she murmured through chattering teeth. She wrapped her arms around the dog, pressing it to her chest, and turned back toward the shore. The current fought them, and the sack, heavy as sin, dragged behind, but Svetlana would not let go. Her hands, hardened by years of work in a printing house, gripped tight. When they reached land, she collapsed onto the stones, soaked to the bone. Beside her, the trembling dog lay still, its breath shallow but alive. Svetlana tore the rope free and flung the sack aside. Her tears mingled with the river water as she looked down at the shepherd, its fur tangled with algae, its clouded eyes still searching for her. "Who did this to you?" she whispered, her voice quivering with rage and sorrow. She remembered her old cat, Mirzik, whose death had left a hollow space in her heart. This dog, discarded into the river, stirred not only pity in her, but fury at such cruelty. She knew time was short. The dog, whom she had already begun to name in her mind. She named her Greta, drawn by that defiant look in her eyes. The dog was on the brink. Svetlana, her own legs trembling, lifted her gently and carried her to the car parked near the bridge. She wrapped Greta in an old blanket that still smelled of home and drove straight to the city clinic, where her acquaintance Oksana, a nurse familiar with local veterinarians, worked. The drive felt endless. Every raspy breath from Greta tore through Svetlana's heart, but she kept whispering, "You're strong. You'll make it." At the clinic, Oksana met her with a worried expression. Seeing Greta, her brow furrowed. "She's in bad shape," she said, calling the veterinarian. "Drive." Sergey, a man with a tired face and steady, careful hands. He examined Greta, his fingers gently probing her soaked fur. "Severe exhaustion, hypothermia, bruising from the weight, but she's alive. We'll start IV fluids, try to stabilize her." Svetlana nodded silently as tears dropped onto the floor. She recounted everything, the river, the rope, the stone. Dr. Sergey shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. "This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted her dead. I've seen her before. Her name was Greta. She used to belong to a woman who brought her to the shelter. Later, other people adopted her. That's all I know." Svetlana froze. Greta, the name she had chosen at random, was real, already hers. She looked at the dog, now lying still beneath the IV drip, and felt with certainty that this encounter wasn't just a matter of duty, it was fate. She remembered how Mirzik, her old cat, had looked at her before he died, with trust, with love. And she realized she could never leave Greta now. Dr. Sergey brought a warm blanket, and Oksana stayed to monitor the patient. Svetlana sat alone in the waiting room, her damp clothes clinging to her skin. Her thoughts circled endlessly around the dog. Who tied that weight? Why? How had a creature so full of strength and spirit ended up discarded in a river like refuse? These questions crashed over her like icy waves. She knew she had to find the answers, not just for Greta but for herself. Greta, who had fought until the very end, had become her light in the autumn gloom. Svetlana felt, with unshakable clarity, that their story was only beginning. The evening settled over the city in a gray shroud. Rain drummed softly on rooftops, and the river, still churning, carried its waters onward. Inside the veterinary clinic, where the smell of antiseptics mingled with the warmth of electric heaters, lay Greta. Her fur was wet but clean, her golden brown flanks rising faintly with every breath. Her dark eyes, a little clearer now, followed the movements in the room. Her paws, scratched and raw from fighting the rope, trembled. Her breath was ragged but resolute, a living testament to her will to survive. Each breath was a victory over the river that had nearly become her grave. Svetlana sat in the waiting room. Her coat, still damp, lay on the chair beside her. Her hands clutched an empty teacup brought by Oksana. She stared at the door to the examination room, where Greta continued her battle. Her mind drifted back to the river, to the rope, the stone, the eyes full of despair and hope. She remembered Merzik, the loss that had left her hollow, and felt that Greta, pulled from the freezing current, had become not just her responsibility, but her chance. A chance to restore warmth to a heart fractured by the world's cruelty. Dr. Sergey stepped out of the exam room, drying his hands. His face was tired, but in his eyes there flickered a spark. "She's holding on," he said, taking a seat across from her. "Her temperature is rising. The IVs are working, but she's severely malnourished. There are old scars on her back, possibly from beatings. What do you think we should do with her?" The doctor's question, so simple, struck Svetlana like a blow to the heart. She hadn't thought beyond saving Greta. But now, as the dog clung to life, reality came crashing down. Her apartment, small, with a worn-out sofa and the lingering scent of printing ink, was no place for a dog. Her life, consumed by work and the occasional call from her sister, left no room for new responsibilities. And yet, when she thought of Greta's eyes, she knew she couldn't walk away. "I won't leave her," she said softly. Her voice trembled. "Not after what I saw." Sergey nodded, his gaze full of understanding. "Then let's start small. Stay with her tonight. If she makes it through, we'll figure out what's next. And I'll try to find out more about her past. She was in a shelter, but who took her last is still a mystery." Svetlana agreed, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. She stepped into the exam room where Greta lay on a warm blanket. Her paws twitched gently, as if she were still swimming in a dream. Svetlana sat beside her, her work-roughened fingers brushing against the dog's fur, now soft, but still cool to the touch. She felt the faint thump of Greta's heart, and the tears she had held back finally slipped down her cheeks. "You're strong, Greta," she whispered. "You have to live." As she sat there, her gaze drifted to a coil of rope in the corner, the same one tied to the sack. Near the faded knot was a scrap of fabric, barely visible, torn from something larger. Embroidered on it was a single letter, M. Svetlana frowned. This wasn't just trash, it was a clue to Greta's past. She showed it to Sergey, who examined it carefully. "Looks like part of a collar or maybe a bag," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I'll ask the shelter. Maybe someone remembers a dog with this mark." "But Svetlana, be prepared. The truth may be hard." She nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She looked at Greta, whose ears gave a faint twitch, as if she could hear her. They were fragments of a story the dog carried in her heart. Someone had once loved her, perhaps briefly, but how had she ended up in the river, condemned to die? These questions echoed through Svetlana's mind like the persistent tapping of autumn rain, demanding answers. After speaking with Sergey, she decided to act. She called her friend Nikolai, an employee at the local administration, who had access to records of lost or registered animals. He promised to investigate whether Greta had ever been entered into the shelter's database or listed by any new owners. Svetlana stayed at the clinic overnight, sitting beside the dog's bedding, changing warm compresses and whispering to Greta words she herself hadn't heard since childhood. At one moment, Greta opened her eyes. Her gaze, still faint, met Svetlana's, and in that fleeting instant, hope bloomed. The dog was fighting, and Svetlana knew she had to fight alongside her. The next day, Nikolai called with an update. "They remember Greta at the shelter," he said, his voice serious. "She was adopted 3 months ago by a couple, a man and a woman. They didn't leave an address, only mentioned that they were moving. That's all. Svetlana felt her heart tighten. A couple. She thanked Nikolai and returned to Greta, whose legs now twitched more frequently, her eyes searching for her. Svetlana began to tell her about Murzik, the cat who used to curl up on her lap and whose purring she still missed dearly. Greta listened, and her breathing grew steadier. Svetlana could feel that this fragile shepherd somehow understood her sorrow. And yet the mystery of the rope and scars remained. Who was this couple? And why had they treated Greta with such cruelty? Svetlana knew the truth would be painful, but her resolve surged forward like a river. Greta, who had already made her peace with life, had become Svetlana's chance to rediscover her belief in kindness. Their story, born in icy waters, was far from over. Outside, autumn rain drummed steadily against the windows of the veterinary clinic, its rhythm mingling with the low hum of space heaters. Beneath a warm lamp, lying on a soft blanket, was Greta. Her golden brown fur, now dry but still dull, clung to her thin frame. Greta's dark eyes, clearer than the day before, followed Svetlana with cautious attention. Her legs, scarred and fragile, twitched slightly. Though her breathing had become more stable, it still carried traces of the river, cold, merciless, where the rope and stone had nearly dragged her to the depths. Every glance from Greta was a defiance of death, yet the deep scar across her back and the frailty of her body reminded Svetlana that the battle was far from over. She sat quietly beside the dog, fingers clutching the scrap of fabric embroidered with the letter M, the same fragment found knotted to the rope that had nearly ended Greta's life. The mystery of the shepherd, discarded like trash, gnawed at her. The words of Dr. Sergei, about the shelter and the couple who had taken Greta before vanishing, hung in her chest like stones. Svetlana looked at the dog, whose ears twitched as if she could hear her thoughts, and felt a wave of anger, not just at the people who had tied the weight to Greta, but at the world that allowed such cruelty. She thought of Murzik, her cat, whose quiet loyalty had comforted her after her husband left. Greta deserved the truth, no less. Dr. Sergei entered, checking her charts. His expression was serious, but his eyes held a quiet gleam. "She's improving," he said while adjusting the IV. "Greta's eating, even trying to stand. But the scars, they're old. From a belt or a stick. She was beaten, probably more than once." He paused, then looked at Svetlana. "Do you still want to dig deeper?" She gasped softly, her fingers tightening around the fabric. "Billy," she whispered, her voice cracking. She was so trusting. Sergei nodded, his voice now softer. "Shepherds are strong, but their hearts are tender. Someone used her loyalty against her. I contacted the shelter again. They confirmed the couple left no contact information. But someone remembered the man mentioning a warehouse on the outskirts. It might be worth checking." Svetlana felt a chill ripple through her chest. A warehouse. She looked at Greta, whose eyes, filled with weary light, met hers. The scars, the rope, the river, they were all fragments of a story etched into the dog's very flesh. She remembered the way Murzik, sick and frail, used to look at her, silently asking for protection. And in that moment, she knew, she had to find those who had done this to Greta. Not for revenge, for justice. After speaking again with Sergei, she reached out to Nikolai, her friend at the local administration. He agreed to check the warehouses on the outskirts, places where traces of the couple might still remain. "It's an old part of town," he said over the phone, his voice rough. "People rent out storage units and hangars there, often without paperwork. I'll speak to the local officer, but Sveta, this could be dangerous." Svetlana nodded, her thoughts consumed by Greta. She returned to the exam room, where the shepherd now sat. Her legs still trembled, but her tail gave a faint wag. Svetlana dropped to her knees, her fingers brushing the dog's fur. At last, the tears she had been holding back spilled down her cheeks. "You did so well, Greta," she whispered. "We'll find them." Yet the joy of Greta's recovery was clouded with unease. The dog remained weak, her scars hinting at years of pain. The investigation could lead to people capable of real cruelty. Svetlana decided to reach out to Officer Mikhail, a contact of Nikolai's. She showed him the piece of cloth with the embroidered M and told him Greta's story. Mikhail frowned, his gaze heavy. "This isn't just cruelty," he said after examining the rope. "That knot, it's used to keep weights from resurfacing. I'll check out the warehouses, but Svetlana, if it's the people I think, they won't welcome questions." Fear gripped her chest, but she didn't retreat. She returned to the clinic, where Greta was now trying to lick food from her bowl. Svetlana sat beside her, gently stroking her fur. She told Greta about Mirzik, how he used to hide under the blanket, how she missed the warmth of his small body. Greta listened, her ears twitching at every word, and Svetlana felt it again, that the wounded shepherd somehow understood her loneliness. The next day, Mikhail called back with news. "We found the warehouse," he said, his voice tight. "A man and a woman lived there. They rented a corner of the space. Neighbors saw a shepherd, said she barked at night. Then she disappeared. They moved out a week ago, but left things behind. I found a collar, with the letter M." Svetlana froze. A collar. She thanked Mikhail, her thoughts spinning. The truth about Greta, about the couple who had beaten her and thrown her into the river, was near. And its weight terrified her. She returned to Greta, whose eyes now shone with a quiet light, and knew she had to see it through. Greta, the shepherd who had fought to survive, had become a mirror, a reflection of her own struggle with loss. And Svetlana understood now, their fates were intertwined. But deep down, she was afraid. Greta was still fragile. Her recovery was not guaranteed. And the truth about the couple might prove to be darker than she could bear. Still, she felt she had to face them, not to condemn, but to understand why. Greta, who had already said goodbye to life, had become a lesson, a testament to the strength that is born of pain. And Svetlana was ready to move forward, for Greta and for herself. Autumn deepened its pallor across the city. The rain had given way to a biting wind, and the river, still murky, flowed past the old bridge. In the veterinary clinic, where the light of the lamps reflected off the white walls, Greta lay, her golden brown fur now glossy with care. Greta's eyes, still full of life, followed Svetlana's every movement, while her weak legs twitched as if in a dream, running through grass that only she could see. The scars along her back, marks of a belt or stick, had begun to fade, but they still spoke of the river, of the rope that dragged her toward the depths. Every breath she took was a triumph, yet her fragile frame warned that the road to healing would be long. Svetlana sat beside her, fingers clutching the scrap of cloth embroidered with the letter M, a torn piece of the collar found alongside the rope. The truth about Greta, a shepherd discarded like garbage, was close now, but its weight pressed on her chest. Officer Mikhail's words echoed in her mind, about the couple who had lived in the warehouse, and the collar bearing the same letter. There was no doubt now, Greta had been beaten and betrayed. Svetlana looked at the dog, whose ears flicked faintly, and felt anger and sorrow churn inside her. Yet beneath it all, there was hope. She remembered Mirzik, her cat, whose death had left her profoundly alone. Greta, who had fought to survive, had become her light. Dr. Sergey entered, reviewing the medical notes. His face looked tired, but his eyes held a quiet gleam. "She's gaining strength," he said, adjusting Greta's food bowl. "She's getting up, eating, even trying to wag her tail. But her heart is still weak, she needs rest. Have you found anything about those people?" Svetlana nodded, her voice trembling. The officer traced them. The couple lived in that warehouse. Greta was theirs. They left, but their things remained. "I want to understand why they did this to her." Sergey's brow furrowed, and his voice grew softer. "Be careful, Svetlana. People like that, they don't like being found. But if you decide to pursue this, I can help contact a shelter. They might know more." Svetlana glanced at Greta, whose tail gave the faintest wag, as if she understood the word home. That word echoed in Svetlana's soul. Her small apartment, with its worn-out couch and heavy silence, wasn't ready for a dog, but each of Greta's trusting looks reminded her of Mirzik, whose warmth had once been her anchor. She knew she couldn't walk away from Greta now, but the thought of facing the couple filled her with dread. "I need to understand," she said quietly. For Greta, she called Mikhail, who told her the couple, Igor and Marina, had been spotted in a nearby district. "They're renting a room," he said, his tone strained. "I found them through the warehouse owner. They're not on the run, but they're nervous. If you want to talk to them, I can make it happen." Svetlana froze. Her heart pounded. "Talk to them?" She agreed, but fear clutched her ribs. She returned to Greta, laying her hand gently on the dog's fur, now warm and soft. "We'll find the truth, girl," she murmured. "You didn't fight for nothing." The next day, Mikhail drove her to an old house on the outskirts of town, where Igor and Marina were staying. A woman in her 30s opened the door. Her face was drawn, hands twitching with nervous energy, as Svetlana held out the scrap of fabric with the embroidered M. Her voice, though trembling, was firm. "This came from Greta's collar," she said. "I found her in the river, with a stone tied to her neck. She nearly died. Was it you?" Marina's face went pale. Tears welled up in her eyes. "We didn't mean to," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Igor said she was in the way. We were moving. He beat her. I couldn't stop him. He said the river would hide everything." Svetlana gasped. Her throat tightened. "He beat her." She looked at Marina, whose shoulders had collapsed under guilt, and felt a storm of anger and pity collide within her. Then Igor appeared behind the door. His gaze was heavy, but he said nothing. Officer Mikhail stepped forward, his voice resolute. "You're coming with us," he said. "This isn't just a dog. This is a crime." Svetlana turned and walked away, her thoughts a whirlwind of Greta and Marina's words. When she returned to the clinic, Greta was already sitting upright. Her eyes shone, though her legs trembled from the effort. Svetlana knelt beside her, tears falling silently to the floor. "You're alive, girl," she whispered. "And they'll answer for what they did." Dr. Sergey, watching quietly, spoke in a low voice. "Svetlana, think about taking her home. Not right away, when she's stronger. She trusts you. And honestly, you need each other." His words struck her like a wave. She thought of her apartment, where silence was her only companion, and realized Greta might be the one to fill that emptiness. But fear crept in, not only for the dog's health, but for herself. Could she give Greta everything she needed? What if the truth about the couple broke her? These fears spun in her mind. But Greta's gaze, full of hope, was stronger. She began preparing a food bowl, a soft blanket, a toy shaped like a little ball, in memory of Murzik. Sergey helped craft a care plan, warning her that Greta's recovery would be slow and fragile. But Svetlana knew she was ready. Greta, the shepherd who had defeated the river, was her chance to heal, too. And yet, she sensed their story was not over. She waited for news from Mikhail, hoping the truth would bring justice. She knew Greta, like her, deserved a love stronger than pain. The river, once cold and merciless, now sparkled under the sun. Its waters flowed gently, as if washing away the memory of suffering. In Svetlana's small apartment, where the scent of printing ink mingled with the warmth of a new blanket, Greta ran, her golden brown fur gleaming like morning light. Her legs, now strong, thudded confidently across the floor. Her dark eyes shimmered with joy. The scars on her back had faded, but they still whispered of the river, where a rope and a stone tried to silence her. Greta survived, and every leap was a hymn to life. Svetlana sat on the couch, her work-worn hands stroking Greta's coat, her eyes full of quiet gratitude. She smiled, feeling her heart, long locked in solitude, now beating in rhythm with the wag of a tail. The story of Greta, a shepherd discarded like trash, had changed her. Svetlana, once used to silence and the rare call from her sister, had found a friend. Her loyalty reminded Svetlana that even in the darkest days, there is a light, yet that light had come at a great cost, its warmth still tinged with quiet sorrow. After the confrontation with Igor and Marina, the couple who had betrayed Greta, Svetlana returned to the dog with renewed determination. Officer Mikhail gathered the evidence: the rope, the collar with the letter M, and witnessed testimonies from the neighbors of the warehouse. Igor confessed his guilt, his voice hollow and empty. Marina, broken by shame, recounted how he had beaten Greta relentlessly before deciding to dispose of her. Justice awaited them, but Svetlana felt no triumph, only sadness for hearts hardened beyond healing, and for Greta, who had suffered the price of their cruelty. Dr. Sergey, overseeing Greta's recovery, smiled approvingly. "She's a fighter," he said. "And you, Svetlana, take her home, she's already yours." Those words became a guiding star for Svetlana. She brought Greta to her apartment, creating a cozy corner by the window with a blanket and a ball, reminders of Murzik. At first, Greta was timid. Her paws trembled and her eyes searched the river beyond the glass, as if remembering its cold grip. But Svetlana did not give up. She fed her warm porridge, stroked her fur, and told her stories about Murzik, how he loved to bask on the windowsill. Gradually, Greta began wagging her tail. Her steps grew steadier. The lively, clear bark filled the room. Yet Greta's health remained fragile. Dr. Sergey warned that her heart, weakened by the river, required constant care. Svetlana watched every breath, took her to the clinic, and each time Greta fell asleep, she feared the morning might never come. Still, the shepherd dog endured, as if sensing her life now belonged not only to herself but also to Svetlana. One day, Mikhail arrived with news. "The case is closed," he said softly. "Igor had been sentenced, Marina received a suspended sentence. She wrote you a letter. Would you like to read it?" Svetlana nodded, her hands trembling. In the letter, Marina begged for forgiveness, her words soaked with tears. "I couldn't stop him. Greta didn't deserve this. Thank you for saving her." Svetlana wept, not with anger but relief. She hung the letter on the fridge beside a photo of Mirzik, realizing Greta had become a bridge between the pain of the past and the hope of the future. Yet the story took an unexpected turn. Neighbors, learning of Greta's rescue, began bringing food and blankets to the shelter where she once lived. Oksana, a nurse, organized a collection, naming it for Greta. Svetlana watched as people cleaned yards and built doghouses for the stray dogs. Svetlana felt a surge of pride. Greta, so fragile once, had become a symbol of hope, and her story touched many hearts. Svetlana decided Greta deserved to witness this herself. One day, she took her to the shelter where volunteers were painting fences. Greta ran freely, her fur flowing in the wind, her eyes shining brightly. People stroked her gently, and Svetlana felt a warmth growing in her chest. She realized that saving Greta was not merely an act of heroism, it had inspired others to cherish life, even the most wounded. But the most remarkable moment came later. Her sister Nadia, with whom Svetlana spoke only once a month, came to town. "Sveta, I heard about Greta," Nadia said, her voice trembling. Oksana explained, "Why didn't you call? I want to be there with you." Nadia stayed for a week, and her arrival filled the home with laughter and warmth. She played with Greta, fixed shelves with Svetlana, and reminisced about their childhood. Their eyes sparkled with joy. Greta darted around, her ball squeaking in her jaws, and her bark was full of happiness. Svetlana watched them and felt that her life, just like Greta's, had found new meaning. Months passed, and Greta grew stronger, affectionate and playful. She loved to sleep by the window where her ball rested, her gaze calm and peaceful. One spring day, Svetlana took her to the river where she had once found her. The water was now clear, and the banks lush and green. Greta ran across the grass, her coat gleaming in the sunlight, and Svetlana smiled, her tears bright and warm. She knew Greta hadn't just survived, she had given her a family, hope, and faith that kindness always triumphs over cruelty. Greta's story, the shepherd dog who conquered the river, became a legend at the shelter. But for Svetlana, it was more than a tale, it was a lesson in love that surpasses pain and compassion that restores life. Greta, found amid the waves, had become her light, and every time she heard her joyful bark, Svetlana silently thanked fate for this gift that changed everything.